All right, so my research question: how did Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia in the early Hellenistic world affect the identity of Judaism and Jewish society? So, just for reference, I want to show the borders of the Persian Empire before Alexander's invasion and the borders of Alexander's empire right before his death at 323 BC, just to show how much of the Persian Empire he conquered and to show the amount of influence this had on the world overall. So I have a timeline of notable events to my research question. So in 323 BC, I have the death of Alexander. His empire crumbles as a result of his death, and with no clear successor, civil war breaks out. Then there's the War of the Diadochi in 322 to 281 BC. Obviously, power in the Hellenistic world was solidified between the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and the Seleucids in Persia and Mesopotamia. And then we have the Romans take Mesopotamia in 63 BC. And obviously, they take control of Israel as a result of that. And then fast forward quite a bit into the future, 66 to 74 AD is the Jewish-Roman War. And I believe this is as a result of the ideas that flourished from Alexander's rule, and which led to the Jews rising up to face against Roman oppression and taxes, both politically and religiously. So here's my list of sources, and then my arguments from all of this. I believe, from my findings, that I can conclude that Alexander's rule over Israel was influenced by the Jewish population and Judaism to embrace military action and means in order to achieve statehood and rule over themselves. This was further influenced by the creation of Jewish classes spurred from the introduction of Hellenistic culture under Alexander's reign. So I wanted to show the Jewish classes. One side we have the traditional Jews, and then we have the Hellenistic Jews or Hellenized Jews. All this would later on lead to Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, all that kind of stuff. I believe this is the origin of it. Obviously, on the left, I have the strict adherence of the Torah, resistance to Hellenization, such as their cultures and values. They were more rural. They wanted to preserve traditional practices and worship. While on the other side, the Hellenistic Jews, they adopted Greek language and dress. They participated in Greek culture and civic practices. They were more urban, and they blended Jewish and Hellenistic practices and ideas together. I will say both did eventually resist Roman rule and authority, wanting to maintain Jewish identity regardless of cultural differences. Now, for my first source, the description is that this was a chapter of an academic book that I used and it analyzed how different cultures looked at Alexander the Great and shows how they betrayed him. It does this to show how this influenced Jewish resistance against the Romans. It talks about how Alexander ruled and how he's respectful to the Jewish community while the Romans were more oppressive. Jewish writers took his image and used it so they could indirectly challenge the legitimacy and power of the Romans. Alexander was used as a symbol against Roman tyranny. He is also represented positively as a moderate who did abuse the region while Rome brutally ruled the region. Now for my second source, its description was an academic research paper, and I used it to see how different cultures and societies, such as the Jews, viewed Alexander the Great and how they decided to interpret and incorporate him into their identity. It talks about how these interpretations of Alexander would be used by the Jews later on as a way to address prominent socio-political issues that they were experiencing under Roman rule. There is a heavy emphasis on Alexander being seen positively so that the Jews could try and smear the image of the Romans. For source number 3, this is an academic book, and I used it to show the impact of interactions between the Hellenistic and Jewish cultures due to Alexander the Great's reign. It shows how Jewish society reacted and responded to living under Greeks and Roman rule, and how the introduction of their culture shaped the identity and politics of the Jews. This can be seen by its explanation of the rise of class and sex within Jewish society because of Hellenistic culture and customs affecting daily life. Then for my last source, it's also an academic book, which I used to show how taxes imposed by Hellenistic nations impacted Jewish society. Since Alexander implemented taxes that heavily hit the Jewish population, which first stirred up resentment towards oppressive behavior by whoever was ruling over them. When the Seleucids took control of Israel after Alexander's death, the tax system became even more extreme. The high taxation of the Jews was a big factor in influencing the Jews to rise up against the rulers like they did in the Maccabean revolt. So, in conclusion, I think this was a fun project, and I learned a lot from diving into all these sources on my research question. So, overall, yeah, thank you.